Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to be doing this alone today. Nikki's taking a break, and what we're likely to be trying over the next week or two is taking turns. So it's my turn today. What I will be working on is, since I am not nearly as good at this as Nikki is this blot here is actually a cat mini. I put a base coat of brown on it, and now I'm going to try to paint tabby stripes, and we'll see how that works. I'm not sure. We have a tabby cat, and my Roz D&D, and its base coat is this, and it's got kind of grayish black stripes on it, and we'll see how that turns out when I start to try to paint some stripes with a tiny, teeny little brush. I actually tried this once before. Stream on Monday, and it came out terrible. And so I just repainted the whole cat. And if this comes out terrible, I'll probably do the same. If the brown with the black stripes, sort of dotted stripes thing doesn't work, then I'm going to paint it light gray and use dark gray and black for highlights. So I'm going to start working on that, and we'll see how it goes. The other thing I'm going to work on, maybe, is an eagle. This is going to become a golden eagle, which is many shades of brown and some buff, especially underneath. There's highlights on the wings. Not quite sure how this will turn out again. I'm not nearly as good as Nikki, and there's really, really fine detail on the feathers on this particular print. So, one feather at a time. We'll see how that goes. So if this goes very poorly, or alternatively, if this goes very well and there's time left, either because I quit in frustration or because it came out really nice, then anyway, Nikki put the base coat on what looks to be hundreds of dungeon tiles. Warframes, walls, and they all need to be washed with black wash. This is part of a throne room. There's a lot of these. This is one of the largest sets we have. And as I said, depending on how things go with the critters, they look fine just as they are, right? No? Okay. Depending on how things go with the critters, I will be working on dungeon tiles. This is, by the way, this is the throne for the throne room. I worked on that Monday. Chains, Nikki says that once this is washed with black wash, it will look very good. I don't know. I'm skeptical. We'll see. I probably won't be doing this, since she thinks she knows how it will turn out. We'll see. Okay, anyway, I'm getting teeny tiny brush. Here as well, but this one has been trimmed so that there is like one bristle. And the problem with one bristle is that frequently either the paint won't adhere to the bristle, or it'll adhere to the bristle and not come off on the model, or it will just form a little ball at the tip, because that's all it does. Anyway, yeah, I have no clue how this is going to go. Let's find out. Take off my glasses so I can see. So is Vivian LaFleur telling me that there will be no flips today, or that there have not been any flips so far? 128 wants a flip, but Vivian says there's no flips. I'm confused. Or should I do a flip or not? No one's paying attention. They're not telling me what to do. Okay, here. I have a floor tile. Oh. Okay, there. Huh. Either somebody's pleased or somebody's upset, or one of each. I will get out this very nice charcoal colored black and paint a stripe and see how it goes. Didn't mix very well yet. So this, yeah, see, I did that. Most of that. Stripes on our cat are kind of like dotted stripes. They're not solid stripes, so we'll see. I might just try to get like little dots in a stripe-like pattern. Pattern of dots. Like starting here. Tip of the brushes, that's helpful. Got the white background, it might help. Nope, I'm getting the, either there's no paint on the brush, or it's not coming up. You can see this little bitty brush and getting like giant stripes. I'm not sure why that's happening. You know, I understand that it's easy to not ever be happy. finding out here is that there's sort of stripes that kind of follow the contour of the print, which is okay. I'm also seeing is that against this dark brown, it's hard to see them. Kind of a interesting pattern that's developing here on the cat. Don't mind it all. It actually looks pretty good, but can't see it against the brown that I put on because I thought the brown would look better, but it doesn't. You can really see that or not. It shows up better on camera than it does under the light here. Well, I'll just keep going. I'm going to keep doing this, and then what I will do is get like a professional artist in here, maybe somebody like Nikki, and get some feedback about how it looks and if it looks okay or not. And if it does, then that's, that's a good thing. If it doesn't, then we'll just paint it over and start over with something else. But the other thing we're doing today, and as you probably noticed by looking at your clock, is that we're trying the noon to 2 thing again instead of the 10 to the noon to 4 instead of the 10 to 2. Little sense of symmetry back here where it shows. Stripes on the tail. That's going pretty clearly. You know, it looks like it's got stripes on this side. It looks like it just got lops on this side. I'm not sure how that happened. Probably because the tail's in the way. Anyway, I wanted to see how this would turn out, and it's turning out, I'd say, pretty poorly. It's just way too dark. Stripy parts, looking at, well, I think what I'm going to do is give this up at the moment and let that dry. And I'm going to paint it gray, light gray, and then try to do stripes again in a darker gray color on top of that. And see, I mean, at least I'll be able to see what I've got. And if it just looks yucky, see, like this side's okay, I think. You know, as far as tabby kind of look goes. But this side is terrible. And then the back is just a mess. The back has to be, you know, kind of darker all along, and then the stripes come off of it. So I'm going to let that set for a bit. Clean the brush. If I keep putting coats of base coat on there long enough, it'll look just like a blop instead of a cat, and won't be able to do anything with it. Golden Eagle, and it's going to be mainly red-brown as a base coat, and then it's going to have a lot of highlights with letters and buff. That's going to work. It looks like just individual feather stuff. Individual feather has spine that goes down. The center of the feather is light, and then the feathers are dark, and I have no clue how I'd be able to pull that effect off. This part, these flight feathers, are very finely detailed in the kind of a darker brown color, darker highlights than the red brown. This part up here is got lighter highlights on all the feathers, just all over the place. This is like buff. Underneath there is buff on this part and dark here. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is going to turn out any terribly much better than the cat, but we'll do our best. Anyway, this cat is a failure at this point, so we're going to make it gray. At least all the highlights that I put on it, you know, the attempts at stripes and things will at least show better. That tiny little brush just too big. The stripes are just too fine. Okay, well, I'm not going to use that jar because it is empty. This jar just has paint in it. Goodbye, brown cat. Hello, gray cat. This isn't exactly how gray tabbies happen. Our tabby, which is kind of a gray tabby, actually has a brown undercoat like what I had before with darker stripes, but that just isn't working on this model. The minifig, so we're going to make it gray. Get out the teeny tiny brush again and try to do teeny tiny little things. Space between the legs, it is actually part of the print, but it's not part of the animal. And I painted that black, and I'm going to try to just leave it black here as I put in the base coat. It's okay. Gray cat. So if this doesn't work, there's this thing called a Tuxedo Cat. We actually have one of those. And it's pretty much gray with a little bit of shading on it. And the part here is why it's called a tuxedo. It is white. Worst comes to worst, you'll end up with a Tuxedo Cat. I'd like to get a striped cat, kind of spotty stripes. We'll see. We got a couple of shades of black and gray, so once that's dry, we'll be able to give that a go. And what I'm going to do next is actually put a base coat on the eagle. And I'm going to end up trying to paint that. At least I'm going to see what it's like painting those feathers. I don't know. You know that eventually this will have to turn brown. I'm going to paint the underside of the body by holding it first. Put it back on the stand, because when it's on the stand I can't get to this bit. Which also means that when I actually end up painting it, highlights and everything on it, this part will be one of the last parts. Paint the little claws, the talons, because only will they be painted a different color, obviously, but they also, that's what goes into the sticky on the top of the handle. And if I painted those, the paint would just come off anyway. So after working on these, I think I'm going to be relegated to like reptiles and amphibians probably. I did do a badger, which turned out okay. The body part was pretty simple, but the face was a little bit of a challenge because of all the black and white highlights. I paint about this part out on the wings. Should be good in terms of getting it back on the handle. I'm hoping this is a good base color for this, because it's kind of in the middle. I can do lighter shades of brown and darker shades of brown, and actually some blacks. The guy. Guess I'll finish the underside. Get this base coat on. I'll go back to making a mess of the cat, because the new gray undercoat will likely be dry by then. Yeah, print, I'm not sure. Dry brushing, I guess. When I start doing highlights, I'm going to do the tops or the fronts of the wings. They have little feathers there that are, each individual feather is brown and the edges are a lighter color. Terrific. And there's just hundreds and hundreds of them. I'm not sure how I'm going to get that look. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to paint this one feather at a time. So what I'm going to try to do is more of quite impressionist, but I want to give the impression of eagle feathers without having to paint hundreds of tiny edges of feathers that are not even visible. So it's kind of this stippled look. What I'll do is I'll get a lighter brown color, and I'm going to try something that can always repaint it. Actually put a little bit of metallic in the paint. If the highlight will, it's a golden eagle, so why not, right? Oh, Boo, I'm so glad you're happy. Is there something that helped you become happy, or was it just like the passage of time? Where did you eat lunch? By the way, I'm going to go back to this. This is the third time I'm starting on the cat. Cat. Get out the teeniest little brush again, which I have had little success. I'm wondering if instead of paint, the black wash would work better. Doesn't show as well. No. I'm going to go back to the charcoal black for contrast. And once again, I'm going to attempt to get kind of and we'll see how it looks. Only 3 coats of paint on it so far. Probably can get like 7 or 8 before it loses the detail. Paint doesn't adhere to the very point of it, the tip of the brush, so I can't get a very fine detail. I can get that. That's kind of what I'm looking for in terms of a stripe. So, okay, well, here we go. Basically, though, I'm trying to paint a tabby cat. This is my third getting some sort of stripe pattern. I tried light brown with the base coat, and that didn't work. And I tried a darker brown as the base coat, and that didn't work. So I'm just going with black on gray. I'm just not doing too badly. See, I got this side of the cat before, and it actually looks pretty decent. It's all kind of stripy, right? But then I did this side, and it just turned off awful. So I'm not quite sure what I need to do, other than try to look somewhat symmetrical. I don't know. Hi, Ted Violence. Thanks for joining in. Well, it's sort of going okay. I'm trying to paint this cat. Make it look sort of tabby-ish. Nikki is really good at this kind of detail stuff. Because, you know, she's younger, she can see things, her hand is steady, all that kind of good stuff. Trying to get these stripes on to look sort of stripy without looking, you know, too weird. And this is actually the third time I am doing this. The first two were failures. So far, I think that this side looks pretty good. Ears here. But it's not too bad. It's a little harder because of the tail there. Like the cat mouth here or something. Paint just isn't cooperating. I think I'm not really quite sure what to do about that. We'll try. You'll try a little black and white. So, what all do you think? Need some shading, but I mean, just immensely subtle kind of shading on the back. I don't know, just putting bits of black wash on this, not knowing quite what will happen. But it looks really flat right now, and that's not good. You know, the best way to do that is let Nikki do it. Okay. So much. Get some little black wash and see if I can highlight the cat's mouth. Really should have done put a different kind of undercoat around it, like lighter underneath, but I didn't. So I'm kind of stuck with what I've got here. A little bit of sand color that we've got. Get inside the ears. Here it is. To get the gray out, you touch up back to it. Do the edges again, but fortunately I haven't put stripes there yet. Let that dry and then come back with the gray. You want to do some highlighting around the face with some stripes. And get the mouth first, and then retouch up the gray. You can see where the mouth is, or where it's supposed to be, but it's way too big, so I'm going to have to get out a gray paint and try to somehow make it a little smaller. Pick it up around the eyes. But before I get the gray out, this is going to be a green-eyed cat. To get some green paint. Everything else is kind of weird looking. Been used, never. It's not shaken up at all. Give that a really good shaking. I'm going to have to like extreme dry brush some details on the cat. I think I'm going to give it, you can see where the paws are. I think I'm going to give it like black toes. And I got the stripes okay, but it just looks so dull and dead. I'm not sure. I don't know. Not quite sure what to do with it. I mean, like extremely watered down, very, very light highlighting or shading. Black wash. Maybe brown wash. I wish I could test. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to test it. I'm going to paint gray. Simply not focusing. Cat's eyes here somewhere. Half of the face green. Seriously, I can't. Look at that. There have to be some serious give and take with the gray paint here, but I think that's more or less where the eyes were. These days I'm gonna have to, I have this ring light with a magnifying on it. And to be honest, with something like this, I kind of need that. And the light from this little camera light is really pretty decent, but it's doesn't make it more sharply focused. Okay, I'm going to do, waiting for that stuff to dry before I try to touch up the face with the gray. But I am going to make the paws black. This is not too bad looking. Again, it just needs some shading, and I'm just not sure how I'm going to do that. The face clearly needs some fixing, so stop playing with the stripes and the paws. Gray out again, and try to fix the eye, which is rolling halfway down its face, and the ears. Basically, try to fix the face. You have to go back and forth a couple of times before it's awful. like I get this one ear, left ear pretty good, but then I painted too much in the right ear. It's pretty not good. Face is not too bad. Need to make this line a little smaller. Bit more. Need to put more buff back on that ear. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a test patch. I'm going to put some cleanest brush. And I'm going to paint a gray blot, a splotch here. Now I'm going to put some stripes on it, cat, and I'm going to see what happens if I use a black wash and a brown wash in very, very tiny, really incredibly thin amounts. Let's see if I can get the stripes to work. I mean, to get the shading on the cat. Because it needs some sort of shading somehow. But practically invisible. Okay, I'm going to try to fix this ear again. Got too much buff. Too much of this sand color in one spot and not enough in another. Too much out when I painted the gray back. I just need to come back and touch up that spot because I couldn't get the lighter color in without putting more in the spot. But not bad. So I just need to touch that up a little. Maybe this needs to go up. Get a little higher on the ear, and of course in so doing I'm putting it where we don't want it. It doesn't behave that well. Okay, well I'll need to do tiny little bits of gray all over the place to fix that because that just made a mess. Yeah, I mean, I just got it almost in the eye. dried up pretty quickly, so I'm going to get out the tiny brush again. This one. Put some charcoal, put the black stripes on it. That spot's like twice the size of the cat. So it goes. Stripes on the cat had gone on. Mostly as this is. But no. The reason the surface wasn't cooperating. And this succeeded in having the same stripy but very dead looking look as the cat does right now. So that's just going to set for a bit to dry. Get the gray paint out again and keep trying to fix the right ear. Hello, Captain Conman. Every once in a while I look up at the chat screen. Not very often, especially when I'm trying to stop making a mess of this cat's right ear, which is now the third time I am trying to fix the mess that I made on the cat's right ear. Get off the bitty brush again, put some gray paint on the brush, try to focus, which I am having a very hard time doing. I mean, not mentally focusing, but working terribly well today. Detail. Put gray where I want it, and not buff where I don't. The ears look sort of symmetric. Usually Nikki would be doing this kind of fine detail, but she decided that it'd be great fun to see if I could. So for all I know, we're taking turns now painting. When it's her turn again, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if basically this cat just gets base coated again and started over. got most of the paint that's in totally the wrong spot. Jeez, really. It's kind of glossy and it's hard to tell if it's covered or if it's just shiny. Looks like it's just shiny. Okay, I haven't painted the eyes closed. And having done that, I need to do a little bit of dark gray touch-up on the top of the head again to put the marking back that I painted off for the 4th time. Yeah, it is kind of like a Bengal cat or a black-footed cat. Actually, I think the markings have come out kind of cool looking. I just have to figure out how to do the shading without just destroying it all. So if you've got any ideas, or if you want to come over and do it, check the islands, that would be good. Yeah, little black-footed cats, those are just absolutely gorgeous. They have some at the zoo here, our local zoo. And they're just amazing. Okay, I need to do something about the tail here. I need to do a little stripy thing there. The underside of the tail being lighter and not striped is fine. But just like right there, it needs something. Okay. Yeah, thanks. You can probably save this from myself. Nikki was trained as an artist. I was trained as... Okay, so my painting skills are not really terrific, especially since I can't see and I can't hold my brush steady. I mean, other than those 2 things. Too bad. When I was a kid, I used to do models, and most of them were airplane models, and we didn't really have good metallic paints back then. I mean, there was Testor's silver, but it was so thick and you couldn't do anything. And my family, growing up, I had never even heard of an airbrush, much less had one. Not that you could really effectively use it with those paints unless you thinned them really heavily. But I did build. Maybe I'll pull one out. Yeah. Yeah, I have a magnifying glass. Actually. This thing called Helping Hands. All these little things here would hold clamps, alligator clamps, but, you know, and I actually had this marvelous thing when I used to paint models when I was even younger, is a ring light, you know, like that, fluorescent ring light with a big magnifier in the middle. And I hadn't, thanks for reminding me about this. I forgot all about having this, which, oh good, now I've got 3 reflections of the ring light from the camera. There, you can see it. That's not distracting at all. And it's filthy, but you can use that and just see how deficient this particular paint job is. Look at right there, needs some gray. Well, I'm just not going to do that, but I'm going to clean this up. I think that's a really good idea. I'm going to figure out how I can use it without the lights to the side like this. That work for you? No, you can't. Anyway, I'm going to do that in between shows, is figure out how I can use this at the same time that I'm using the ring-lighted camera, because it would make a big difference being able to see the work. Yeah, this helping hands thing I bought a long time ago, you can put like 5 alligator clips on it, put them all over the place, holds a magnifying glass. Kind of a cool thing back in the day when I had helping hands. No. Thanks for reminding me that that exists. Certainly help with the seeing things. It might not help with the shaky 70-year-old hands. At the top of this important striky part of them. I'm just looking around, see if there's any parts that look really unfinished. Black feet are finished. I'm going to paint them well out onto the stand, because that'll get painted over when I figure out how I want to paint the base. The front of it actually looks okay. That's not too bad. It is sort of a scientific contraption, isn't it? Yes. It's official. It's really nicely weighted. It's got this really heavy weight on it. It's got little set screws everywhere, so everything can rotate in every direction. So just, yeah, I mean, just everything, everywhere. Then you can use them to tighten things up. Kind of a bizarre looking thing, really, and it's way overbuilt. I mean, it's seriously like 3 times heavier than it needs to be. But if I clean up the magnifying glass and I figure out how to arrange the camera, feeling so that reflections, that's fun. Just, yeah, I'm playing with my helping hands here, is instead of looking down, look through so that the reflections are kind of out of the way. Let me see. I mean, it's only like a 2-time magnification, but it does help. See a flaw, and I can't tell. That's a speck of the wrong colored paint, or yeah, I guess it is. Okay, well, the downside, yeah, you can. Digital art is a lot easier, isn't it? I mean, in the sense that you can change the perspective, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can make the color change. Okay. So now that I could see that larger, and I can see some of the flaws in it, I'm going to have to get the light gray back out again and touch up some spots on the ear that I couldn't even see before. Of course, if I couldn't see them without the magnifying glass, you probably can't see them on camera. So it wouldn't matter. But now that I know they're there, I have to make sure that I take care of them. So I'm going to try this again. Do this at an angle. You can't see anything other than the paint bottle and a bunch of reflections, but only bit is gone. Even worse for you on screen, isn't it? Can't tell anything. You can see. Let's see what I'm doing for you. Me a lot, even though it didn't make it feel very interesting. There's the cat back. Not too bad. Nope, totally off camera. That was bad. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an exaggerated color. There. Tabby Cat. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this test swatch that I made here, which simulates the bland-looking cat. I'm going to get the black wash. How many of these are open? Okay, that's the one that's open. And the, practically disappeared brown brush. I'm going to actually use a fairly larger brush, admitting that I have no idea what I'm doing here. I'll work other than that. The cat looks really flat. Take the littlest. There's hardly anything on the brush. And see what happens if I try to do some shading. Well, now I have to say, all you can see on is kind of a dark dot. The brown wash gives it a really kind of nice color. It also says that the paint better be really very, very dry. Otherwise it'll run. And what I can do is I can get a little heavier on the top and just barely dry brush some of it down around the sides. I'm gonna let that dry. Not too bad. I'm gonna see what happens with the black. When I take a break, which will be, oh, I don't know, in about 15 or 20 minutes, I'm going to ask the advice of Nikki, who actually does know what she's doing with this kind of stuff. About shading and how she thinks it might look. Blackwash does succeed in shading. And that might be okay too. If you just want to keep it kind of that gray color. You have to be really careful with the black there, is it? We'll see what it does. It tends to be lighter as it dries. So we'll let those dry. And then decide what to do about shading on this very mottled looking but dull looking kind of cat. The head. I want to play with it terribly much more. So we'll set that aside for the moment. And what I'm going to try to do is go back to this eagle, which did not, the paint just didn't cover it well with a base coat. I'm going to have to rebase coat some parts of it. Just really, look at that. It came out all scabby looking. It just didn't cover. So, yeah, another part of the day is going okay, but not terrific. There's just a lot of texture in this print, and I think what happened is it looked like the paint was covering, but after it dried, you get some pullback and a little separation here and there, and white spots show through. And I'm thinking that, doing highlighting isn't necessarily going to cover those spots in the way that I want. So base coat that again, these spots that are showing. Especially weirdly, like the edges of the feathers here. If anything, need to be darker rather than lighter. Didn't cover, look like little landing lights on a jet. Okay. That's going to dry really fast. And what I'm going to try to do is the front of the wings have this stippled look, which is pretty much just each feather. Reddish color, which is not helpful because don't really have the right color for it. But what I'm going to try to do, this may or may not work at all. I don't know. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal because I can just really. Okay, right along the front of the wings here, there's this modeling, which is basically the edges of every single feather are lighter than the center of every single feather. And there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lighter brown color called Flat Earth. Really need to get one of those making them now. Or just tell it. Okay, all these little wells in it, so I could dip some colors in and mix them and things. So I'm gonna try this, and if it doesn't work, I've got plenty of this brown color that I can paint over it again, because I've been doing that. Let's do this in a cup. This might be a little paint wasteful, but we'll see. We need to find the Flat Earth color. Here. I'm going to take some of the Flat Earth, a fair amount of it actually, if I can get it open. Ah, what a day, what a day. Take copper. It's a metallic color. Put that in. Kind of a reddish, sparkly color. Like pretty decent metallic look to it. I'm going to take this brush, which I've used. It's a really coarse bristle brush. But what I can do is just dip it lightly in the paint and stipple. See that, but kind of like that. If I get the paint right, it's that effect. But this is going to need a whole lot more of this reddish copper to be visible, so I'm going to just put it there. I have no clue again about how this is going to look, but we're going to hold it in our hands because it needs to be held pretty hard. And I'm going to dribble it all over one of the wing. Demarcation line there between the little bitty feathers on the front of the wings. The white feathers on the back. And I want to get the front part. One thing here is not the best thing in the world. Is that there's just too much of it there. Looks like it's not coming out in little bitty dots like I wanted it to. But I have to say that I kind of like the color effect. What we might do is I might just continue this, and then you know, it's really not too bad. I mean, it's not looking like it with the flight feathers, but slightly uneven. Yeah, I'm going to let that go. That'll get dry. Made a huge mess. We'll deal with that later. But, you know, that's kind of a... I like that kind of quasi-metallic look on it, you know? Let's see what Nikki says. So what I'm going to try to do next is these flight feathers here are really highlighted in a very dark brown color. And I happen to have a dark brown color. And I'm going to just really lightly go over all these big, yeah, I know, get our camera, these larger flight feathers there and on the tail. A little bit there. The head actually is a much lighter color. But there and there and there and there. And then the spine of the feather, the quill, is actually very light. Like ivory almost. And I'm not sure I can pull that off. I'm not quite sure how, but what I'm going to do first though is I'm going to take the brown that I use, that's the base coat. See, it just, the coppery color got over the boundary there, and that's going to show underneath, and I don't want it there. So I'm going to stick this back on the stand and retouch up just these little bits along the edges here, so that when I put the darker on it, interesting is I'm trying to do a golden eagle. Looks like a copper eagle right now. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think of that that sort of metallic look on there? I'm going to repaint the flight feather part. but it does not take on the same color as the front of the wings. Touch this up just here, and then I'm going to take a quick break, a short break, and do flight feathers. The darker brown, and I'm kind of tempted to try to continue that metallic look as well. I'm not sure. Oh. Thanks, Tech. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to try that. I was thinking of actually trying it on the bear, but it would have looked kind of doofus on the bear. But I think it makes a kind of a neat effect. Anyway, the flight feathers, you know, painting those kind of dark. The darker brown, just not all the feathers and not all the way back. Let's see how that turns out. Let's see, it's just 2 now. Being somewhat encouraged by that not looking stupid, I'm going to make the darker brown right now, which that isn't. That's the same color as what I'm working on, flat brown. And I'm going to paint a couple of the flight feathers just to see if the contrast works. So, well, almost making it faster. I'm going to take a really fine brush. I'm just going to try it on a couple of these feathers. Is that there's like these demarcation lines. I think I'm just going to do the tops of the feathers dark. This isn't much darker than the other color. See if it even shows up. Doing it, some of these feathers like this. Maybe I'll just do like one wing so I can compare and contrast with the other after it dries. This paint changes color really dramatically as it dries. And if this doesn't work, as a darker contrast color, you can always go with like a black color too. I think even though it won't show very much, when we give the upper wings an umber wash. I might just highlight the tips of the feathers with like a black wash. This darker brown does show, but it's very subtle. don't want the undercoat to be much lighter. I'd rather have subtle variations in the color, I think, rather than really dramatic ones. I might try to do that with a black wash shading. Just finish up the other side. When you see this on the color chart, the difference between these two paints, two colors, is really big, really huge difference. But then when you paint one on top of the other, it all seems to disappear. This turns out to be, the difference is just too subtle. I mean, you can see some of the texture in the feathers, but I think I could get that better with a wash. These quills on the eagle, there are like these, like I said, the quill part of the feather is ivory. Really white. So I think I might try to do is capture that first before I do a wash. And yeah, if it doesn't work out, repaint it and start over. Well, you know, that really looks a lot better on camera than it does in person, really. It's kind of cool. And the shading on the flight feathers shows up better there too. What did I do here? This color, I think. I think I really do need to try to at least try to get the quills to show on these flight feathers. Just not in a lot of places, but just in a few. If I can just capture a couple of those to get demarcation, and then I can use some black wash to highlight. I'm guessing like highlight the tips of the feathers. That isn't really the way the bird looks. The back of the feathers has the darker part. But I'll do that with a wash. But I just want to see if I can pull this off at all. Need to get a palette. Okay, this will probably not work, but this is the easiest part to retouch. What I'm going to try to do is capture the look of some of the quills that show up in the feathers. And that would be, you'd think it would be like the highest part of the feather, but I think that would look wrong there. So I'm going to take the tiniest little bit here and just start with one. That paint and this brush just are not compatible. I mean, it's really, it's too viscous. And so it just gums up on the brush and doesn't come off in a neat line at all. Okay, that just looks awful. No, that's not bad. I don't quite know. I'm thinking, let me try this. Fail. I'm going to dry brush. Then hit the high points. Since I'm playing, just before I take a break, I'm going to take this, which is the umber wash. Wait, on the tail, I'm thinking that did not turn out too badly. It comes down. The ivory that's on the tail. It still keeps that kind of ruffled look, which I think is pretty nice on the tail. What I want to do though is I'm going to repaint those wings later. So I'm going to let that dry. I'm actually going to take some black wash and touch the tips of the feathers a little bit later. But first, I need to get rid of this. That just didn't work. So I'm going to go back to the red-brown and repaint those flight feathers. Something different. I'm doing this pretty carefully because I don't want to mess up the front of the wings because I like the way that turned out. Seeing something there that might be kind of okay. I'm going to paint it over and then try again. A little differently. But what I'm seeing is if I can get the ivory down in these deep hollows, and then brush over it like with a dry brush with this brown, it might look the way I want it. Probably not, but it might. And I did like the highlighting with the darker brown. I'm going to do that again too. And I'm going to put the ivory in pretty much just along here in these areas, and then brush over it to see if I can get some highlights. But that has to dry first. Okay, so this tail doesn't look as good as I had hoped it would. But let's try something. Again, that can just be repainted. Stuff out. Try not to splatter all over me. They're quite dark on the top, so I'm taking some black wash. Brush, and I'm going to try to the tips. the ends of the feathers to be pretty dark. Even little banding. Well, you know, I'm kind of liking how the tail is working up here. It's pretty good. I'm gonna try something up here though. The edges of the feathers of this black wash, catching the high points and leaving the low points, pretty much. Really bring out the texture in the feathers. See how that looks. Too much of it. Well, items are up. Yeah, I think that looks okay. I'm going to do the other side too. Little thing that you can't see at all because I'm way off camera here. There we go. Too heavy. Yeah, it's a little better. The eagle feathers back here are really quite dark. How that turned out. So what I'm going to do is let that dry and clean this. Up in the front here, just around the top of the head, like right here, is a really light patch. Really light brown, and I don't want to do too much of it. Yeah. Use this color. And what it is it's just right behind the eyes. So it's fairly far back, right? Like a little rush. Yeah, right around here. And up across the top. Oops. I'm going to try to dry brush that because it shows the dark underlayer. I really don't want it to cover. I just want it to lighten up those spots. It feathers back into feathers. Actually, kind of the look I'm going for is I don't want it to fully cover. There you go. It goes down kind of low on the chin here. Means you can really see it without it. Really close to what I want right now. You know, I think the wings and the tail actually came out pretty well. A little more black just on the edges here, I think. Okay, we can do that real quick. Ugh, everything's just a mess here all of a sudden. It's little. It's tail came out kind of cool. Like that. Okay. So this eagle is actually looking better than I thought I would at this point. Yeah, you can't see any of it. I'm still on camera all the time. There we go. So I'm trying to get this look up here. Has that lighter color, but it's really not solid at all. It's just really light like that. Okay. I'm going to need the magnifying glass to get the eyes and the big beak in later. So there's the top of it. Going on there. Look at the eagle. The bottom of the eagle is really kind of interesting. The kind of coppery color along here. Still have some of it alive. Touching up along the front of the wing here, and maybe down along the back. The bottom of the wings, have a lot of very, instead of being like dark and coppery on the top, they are actually that kind of very light sandy color all through here. So when I get that, I'm going to try to do that. And then these back wings are really dark underneath those. Those will probably be a fair amount of black wash, kind of close to the top. But this is very light underneath. And the bottom of the eagle is pretty much just that color. This would be really good right here, though. Sides of the legs. See if I can retrieve a little bit of this color yet. Goldenish. Feathers on the legs. Not bad. What do you think so far? That looks like a golden eagle. Get a golden eagle face. But I'll work on the bottoms of the wings next. And before I do that, though, I'm going to take a break. Get a little bit of a snack because I haven't really eaten anything today. And we'll let that rest. And I'm going to also get an opinion about the wash on the cat. And I'm leaning toward the brown wash. Just to change the color a little bit and let me do some shading. So I'll clean these off. And this new setup that we've got here lets me push a button that says take a break. Let me see if I can find it here. It says break. So here we go, breaking. much for the break. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the cat for now. This is my spotty stripy cat. And the consensus from somebody who was in the middle of a business meeting and didn't really want to talk was that the brown wash was the way to go rather than the black. Brown doesn't muddle, the black just sort of muddies things up. This actually gives it a slightly different color look. So I'm going to use tiny bits because I don't want to just make a mess of it. And what I'm hoping to do is kind of shade darker on top, and little fronts and stuff, and then kind of lighter toward the bottom. Then maybe do something the top of the tail just to highlight that. But pretty much what I'm going to be doing is just some hopefully really light shading without making too much of a horrible mess of things. So we'll get our little cup, put a drop of umber wash. Don't need very much. And start by using tiny little bits of it because I don't want it to get really dark. I just want it to get just a little sense of not quite so flattishness. And work kind of down the center of the back. Oh, good. Here's one of our cats. This is not the Tabby Cat. This is the Tuxedo Cat. Who doesn't really want anything other than to let us know that he's here. Do the kind of the fronts of the legs, a little less in the front of the cat, more on the sides. Here, what would be part of the tail. I'm thinking, actually, this helps a lot. The cat is looking really this gives it a little better color. Lights a few areas. So what do you think? This shading helps some? It'll cool down a little as it dries, but I think it helps. It gives it a little more life. I like the kind of brownish tone it gives to the model. I'm going to do the ears. The ears are now very bright. And that helps. Here's two. I don't know why it worked on one and not the other, but paint. There. The bright spot in the back. That's the back. Just needs to be a little darker there. Thank you. Thanks, Tech. Yeah, I'm not as good at it as Nikki. She's had a lot of practice being in art school and all, and I basically had no practice other than doing this kind of thing. But I think that came out okay. And now what I need to do is I'm going to paint the base. I think I'm going to paint the base just brown. Look at my color chart. What have I got here? Maybe, yeah, green wouldn't look good. I really like the red brown. It's that's the base color that I painted on the eagle. I think that might work. Needing bright spots. I'm going to highlight the tail a little bit, making that just a little darker there. Yeah, I hope it still looks like a cat. Got a little bit of a hyena look to it. I guess, yeah, it's not too bad though. I think I'm pretty much finished with this. I'm going to let it set for just a bit. And then let that dry. And I'm going to paint the base next. Because I want the eagle to be fairly dry, because I have to flip it over. You know, this is a really handy thing, okay? Really handy, but it's like, okay, there's the bottom of the eagle. Now what? And I can't really stick this on it, because then, yeah, because then it would pull the paint off. So I'm going to have to, like, pull this off, get the talons, which are there, and like hold it by the little tips, I think. Since I'm using the red brown for the base of the cat, that will give me a chance to touch up those spots as well. And I'm going to get a little piece of paper towel and set this on it because I don't want to scratch up what I've done. Put that there. So I'm going to do two things with the red brown now. Three things. One is find it. One is to paint the base of the cat. I don't know. Is that going to be enough contrast, that color? No, it's not. I'm going to use the red brown anyway to touch up the eagle. on the bottom before I start painting the very bright white highlights. Everybody remembers what I'm doing with the eagle is that there's some very distinctive on the front part of the wings, very white highlights on the wings, all the way like across. Pretty much going to be painting stripes again. There'll be white stripes on this. And then I'm going to use the black wash. Depending on how bright that is, I might brown wash it to tone it down a little, and then use the black wash to catch the tips of all the feathers, because those are dark. But this brown isn't dark enough to give enough contrast with the cat, so I'm going to use flat brown, which is our darkest brown, which I had out here before because I was trying to use it for highlights. Oh, well, speak of the devil, I just screwed up. I used the dark brown, the flat brown, instead of the red brown to do the touch-up on the eagle. So now I need to touch up the touch-up, because otherwise the touch-up will be much darker than I want it. That like just in time as I was trying to find the other color of the paint. You can't see the difference between the colors very much when they're against each other, but you know, it's enough to know. Especially since they were just weirdly odd spots. Okay. So there we go. I fixed that. Watch this brush again. And the eagle will move aside. And bring out the cat, which has now been shaded and looks, you know, it's darker, kind of brownish gray. No, odd looking. But it is what it is. So unless somebody wants to start all over again, I'm just simply going to paint the base and call it a success. I'm going to use this little bitty brush again because I need to get under its haunches and around its feet. Paint this out about that far, and then I can use a slightly larger brush to finish it. You know, give it a smoother surface. I'm mostly on camera. It's kind of an odd thing, actually. Very shiny at the moment, but it flattens out pretty well. Around the little kitty toes. already see where I painted originally how it gets flat built nice and fast. Dark enough to show contrast with the cat. Yeah, I think that'll look okay. Itty bitty brush, and now I'm going to use that to paint white stripes on the eagle. In the meantime, I will use a slightly larger brush to finish painting the tops and the sides of this base. I have to say, I am like, I don't know, I give this cat a C. There's just, you know, just, I don't know. See, this isn't bad. It looks okay there, but maybe a B minus. Way of making Mickey's painting look good in contrast. Although my poison dark frog came out really well. I thought that was pretty cute. Okay, so there's one B minus. Yeah. That aside, bring this guy back. And I'm looking at the pictures again. The light colored stripes are really kind of wild thing. You start at the very front of the wing, like right there, and just kind of follow the feather lines just everywhere. So it's going to look a little weird, but it's going to, I mean, that's just the way it is. It's going to look. So I'm going to use a really fine brush and see if I can get those in. And if it works, okay. If not, I know that it's not that color, but this color, that's the base color. So I'm going to use, we bought this dark sand kind of by mistake. And it's like, well, I don't know, it looks like it's okay. We could use it for something. But it's really turned out to be a very useful color for this kind of thing. It's, it's a, kind of a brownish tone to it. It's a little darker than the buff color, which is also something I could be using. Oh no, they're really white. Actually, I'm using ivory on this. I use the ivory. Those lines are really bright. And then I can always put a little brown wash on them to tone them down if necessary. I know I put some in a cup. Yep, there it is. Just use the same cup. That ivory is now way too viscous to use. I wish this were a little thinner, but I'm using such tiny amounts of it that if I tried to use thinner, okay. No, they're just kind of streaky lines, I mean, just like that. This page is too thick to give me nice clean lines, and it's actually spattering. I don't have no clue what that's about. But that actually is, oh yeah, it looks on the bird. The root of the wing, and it comes down in these kind of weird, uneven things, kind of flailing out toward the sides. Yeah, so yeah, I mean that is not very artistic, but it's fairly realistic. Thinking brown wash on that, real light brown wash, and then this isn't perfectly correct, but I think what would look good on the tail here is if the inside of the tail were ivory colored too. Bottom, this is really dark here, so I'm going to do a double wash. I'm going to put a brown wash over this. I'm going to tone down this. And then I'm going to use a black wash along the front edge of the wings and the backs of the tips. Same thing in the back of the tail here, and on the underside. See how that looks. Because right now that kind of captures the color, but it's really bright. I think it needs to be toned down just to, just some. Let that dry. Let's see. This thing is now everything in. You kind of made a mess. So yeah, brown wash to tone that down. The black wash on the leading and trailing edges of the wings, and the tail, and under there, under the chin. And this is now what the cat looks like. Call that cat a victory. Being done. No, I thought I caught the paws really well, but it's just so annoying. When you look at something right when you think it's done, and you see that spot right there that I could hardly reach, just needs to be Okay, well, I'm waiting for that to dry. This eagle, it's on this little stand. There's a little hole in the bottom there, you can see. Hand goes on it. It's actually up in the air. I'm going to take the opportunity to, since I have to do something while that's drying, to paint this. And the eagle's up in the air, so we're going to paint it blue. We have a nice color, light blue. That should look really good for eagle sky. Something I can do without messing up, because it's just a thing here. I'll use this kind of medium-sized brush. Pull out a bigger brush for that. I'm letting that dry because I don't want to put the umber wash all over the livery that I just painted and have it run, because that would be very annoying. The ivory kind of captures the brightness of that. Needs to be brown there. Okay, well, there's the eagle stand. The other thing I could do, and I might as well while I'm waiting for that to dry, is paint the talons. Because they're just kind of sitting out there looking kind of weird, actually. And I'm going to use this kind of brownish, orangish color that I think will be good for that. Out of this, we bought it not knowing that we would end up using it hardly at all. And then we ended up using it for everything. Okay. So I'm going to hold this by the wingtips, and the talons. have to hold this steady like this, otherwise I can't get it done. So we'll move the camera a little bit. Yeah, I'm not getting this at all here, am I? Maybe I'm more. There, you can kind of see a little bit anyway. Oh, that's nice. There's a spot there that needs to be brown and isn't. And it's a next to impossible place to get paint. When I painted the base coat, I managed to miss that, which is why when painting a base coat, I usually get it all over everywhere, so that I don't have missing spots like that later. But now I do. And I managed to get Talon color there too. But this is just all together going, not really well. Okay, so I thought this would be a really quick and easy thing to do while I was waiting for the other stuff to dry, but it turns out not to be what I had hoped. What I'm going to do is now that has to dry, and then I can get out the red-brown again, which is the base coat color. Touch up that spot that I touched that I shouldn't have touched. Touch up that spot that is white. I have no idea how that happened or why. And paint this other spot that I just discovered that didn't get painted in the first place. Ones here, which are paint of everything which I just did. Probably, these actually should have been painted earlier, but the problem was that this is the thing that held it in the handle. Okay, well, it's good enough to know. top of it's still looking okay. So now it's the bottom that needs to be made to look okay. And what I'm going to do is do the brown wash first. Feel any good? Okay. Get out the slightly larger brush. Put the camera back where you can kind of see something. And what I'm going to do is use this umber wash all over the bottom of the wing to tone down the light colored thing there. That gives a little texture. Makes it look a little less bright. The whole wing, just to make sure that, you know, the gloss is basically the same. That actually ends up looking quite a bit better. And then when I put the black wash just along the edges of the wing, it will look, and the belly, it'll look much better. But that has to dry before I can do another color wash on it. In the meantime, what I can do is yet again pull out hopefully red brown, which is the base color, and touch up the spots around the feet. Actually, before I do that, I still have the umber wash out. The talons would actually look better if they were washed. So I'm going to give them a quick wash. And still have the wash out, and there's just enough of it. And it gives it, yeah, I mean, it really does make it look better. What you're probably noticing is that I am not painting the eagle face. I don't know. I'll try it today. The eyes and the beak are really tiny and difficult, and I'm not sure how well that's going to go. What I do know is that there's a spot here that needs red brown. And there's it. Get the brush in there. And then there's a spot that didn't get painted. Yeah, there it is. Way on the inside here. No, paint it. Okay. So the bottoms of the wings look better than they did before they were washed. But if you can see the top of the wings, the black wash really brings it out. So be getting the black wash out in a little while and highlight the front of the wings and the back, just brushing it in here and there, and then under the chin. And hopefully that will help bring it to life. Let's see how that goes. And then there's some spots on the top that just, I don't know, became spotted. Where it's just these little white spots. I'm going to touch that with black wash, just so that it's not so, you know, a little bigger brush with the wash. Okay, so when Zoria learns flying and turns into an eagle, is Nine's going to do that? Nine's just going to It's just going to just be viciously mocking the beautiful eagle before it even really gets going. Okay, so have this off here, and we're just going to start at the front. That's so dark. Touching the edges of these feathers. But this is the bottom of the eagle. It has this every kind of things, and I did the black wash highlighting. The black wash is really dark. I'm not sure what happened to it, why the pigment is that dark. It's, I mean, that's how the eagle is, so it'll be okay. And what we need to do now is paint the bill and the eyes. The eyes are black. I think I should use a glossy black on that, but I'm going to have to, that's when the magnifying glass comes in, that's for sure. I'm going to pull out the magnifying glass and see if I can even find the eyes. The picture has disappeared. The eyes are actually underneath there. Okay, that's not a bad place. I'm gonna there actually there's this little hood with feathers on top here. And the eyes are actually underneath that. So what I can do is get little black spots on there, and since it's nothing but base coat under there, is I can just paint back up to it. They're very hard to see. The bill is that kind of color that the talon is. You just get a dark spot on the end. But I'm going to paint the eyes first. Yeah, paint the eyes first, and then see what I can do about the bill. No, pine nut feathers, no, just really, no. So the eyes are, okay, sorry guys, I need to see this a little close, bigger. The eyes are. That big, but I need to paint them in, and I can bring the brown back up to it, and I need to see where they are to be able to even do that. That looks pretty good. That's where the eye is. It's not too bad either. Having them slightly larger and exaggerate it like that is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay. Is get out this sandy color again, which I put somewhere. The same color I used for the Talons. There it is. Paint the bill. The beak. Little bitty beak. We want this to be pretty obvious. Actually goes underneath the eyes a little bit. Yeah, I got that. And let's paint back up into it. Don't want to mess up. I don't know if I want that pretty much stay as it is. So there, yeah, that's pretty close to where it needs to be. I need to touch up underneath here. Just right on the chin. Now, actually, if I even that out, not too bad. On this side, that's pretty good there. On this side, it needs to be a little bit more. Get that tiny little bit more under the eye. Looking at the picture, the very tip of the bill, the beak there, is actually black, and I'm just going to use a black wash to do that. It is now white. Probably rub the paint on. I'm just putting a tiny bit of black wash on that. That turned out okay. It's a little dark in the front, but I think it's all right. Down near the bottom. And so the pigment gets heavier there. Okay, so what I want to do is the tiniest little bit right on the tip of the beak. why the bird has a little bit of a black nose, but it does. So there. That. Put it on that side. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with that. So what I'm going to do now, let that down, cap this up without splashing all over. Just clean that one. I'm going to check to see if this is dry. Yep, and we're going to mount the eagle on its stand. There, now we will lift this up and show off the eagle. Ooh, against the orange background. That's great. That's the eagle, golden eagle. Especially good, I think, from the top. Yeah, I'm going to take it off of the orange base because that's just ugly. If I can get this off. There we go. All right. Put this back on its stand. There. So what we have done today is done an eagle, which turned out to be not too bad. Painted a cat 3 times, which turned out to be, not great, but, you know, it's okay. You can tell it's a cat. Just couldn't get the colors right. I'm not really sure. You know, the brown base with the black stripes didn't work. The gray base looks okay, especially with the brown wash on it. But I'm not sure what I could have done differently, with at least with the colors that we've got here. Yes, we can put the Loki hat on the alligator figure, but what do you mean by the Loki cat? The base? The eagle base? This is coming off too. The sticky stick still sticks. So we actually have quite a menagerie. So as we're winding up here, and I might end up a little bit early, is you get to watch me clean up, because this is just really got messy. So over the last week and a half or so, what we have done is piece of paper down. We have a cat. Eagle. Nikki did this. An elk. There. Jaguar. Did an amazing job on the spots, I think. And look at the face. You know that? See? That's a cat face. This is sort of a cat face. That did a bear. Got Black Panther. That was too hard to paint. An alligator. Color move. 2 wolves. A rat. Everybody has to have a little rat. There's a rat. Badger. Wasn't really sure what it was supposed to be, but it turned into a badger. And poison tree frog. These guys, which you're now seeing top down. Well, these guys we painted here on this very stream over the last week and a half. Usually we're able to do one a show, maybe 2. We have more coming. Probably Nikki will be doing it on Friday. Taking turns. So on Friday, we will have some more figures. Paint. And that will be interesting. What we might end up doing, there's rumors about this anyway, is that we will each get one and we'll have a painting contest to see who can do the messiest fastest. No, to see who gets to win the popularity contest of this really looks good. So I'm not sure what they're going to be or how it's going to be done, but that might be what we're doing. I know there's some spots on this alligator. I don't know how that happened. It did. I think that's dark green and just there's just little white spots all over the back. So I'm going to take a little bit of this with a little bitty brush and just touch those spots. Because shouldn't be little white spots on the backs of your alligators. So the other thing we need to do, though, which is somewhat less interesting, is we have an entire dungeon. Not the color. How did we paint that? Olive drab? Yeah. We have an entire dungeon set that needs to be blackwashed. And that is not too much fun to watch, but it needs to be done to make them look good. There it is. Maybe we use this color for something. But yeah, these little white spots in the back of the alligators. I don't understand that. Olive drab. It's not just for Jeeps, it's for gators. Okay, so there's the menagerie. If I angle this camera, you can see dungeon tiles way over there. Just tons of dungeon tiles that need to be blackwashed. Somebody's one of us, Nikki or I, will be the lucky ones to do that. Oh, yeah, there was I got the paint out. There was some spots on this that needed to be touched up. This is a door frame. Door frame for the dungeon set. And the side here just needed to be touched up. The doors work. The doors haven't been painted yet. But they go in here and they open and close, so it's actually kind of cool to see it work. Supposed to be the color it is. That it was red-brown. We'll see when it dries. Yep. Looks like it's matching, so that's good. Some of these paints change color really dramatically when they dry. This one, probably more than any. They'll be very different when it dries than initially. Okay, well, just wrapping this up by capping this paint up, washing the brush one more time. Get to the reef. Disassembled something. I'm not sure how I did that. Okay, there's the menagerie again. Throw that off as I do the final cleanup. Make my way around the mess that I made by piling things up everywhere. My glasses, there they are. Okay, so 2, 3, 4. A dozen different animals. Almost all of which came out pretty nice. Yeah, there we go. Cats and rats and bears and jaguars and wolves and badger. And most importantly, the most important one is the elk, because Zoria turns into an elk all the time. Here, that's a good elk view. Zoria turns into an elk all the time and usually saves our butt by ramming into things and taking care of them, because Elsa just waves his mighty swords around, going, "You who are the enemy, give up before the elk grabs you." Okay, so is there anything else I should do today other than let's try to straighten things up? I don't think so. Again, we will be streaming from 10 until 2 on Friday, the usual time. And what we will be doing is, if the figures arrive today, each be painting one in our own personal styles to see how they turn out. And if they don't arrive, we'll be blackwashing all of these dungeon tiles and maybe starting something else that we have some pieces around. Okay, yeah, I think that's it. I'll let this run just a couple minutes more. Hydration here. When is the real Zoria? Here. Yeah, Zoria, I mean, the real Zoria is the elk. Let's face it. That's the real one. He has been a bear. Did a great job with bear, don't you think? It's pretty growly. Gleaming yellow eyes. Nice pointy teeth. Yeah. There we go. That's it for today. I'll be signing off, and hopefully we will see you and a whole lot of other people on Friday between 10 and 2, when we will be painting something and relaxing, because it's relaxing painting. Bye.